California, palm trees, Hollywood, beaches, and once upon a time, a massive inland sea teeming with life. A sea so abundant with fish that it rivaled any ocean. Boats everywhere you looked. Resorts, yacht clubs, and beach houses stretched along the shoreline. But today, much of that paradise has vanished. The Salton Sea, once California's crown jewel of recreation, has turned into one of the strangest and most toxic places in America. But why? Why did this oasis crash? What forces, what miscalculation, what environmental disaster turned a thriving resort destination into a desert wasteland? This is the story of the boom, the bust, and the uncertain future of the Salton Sea. The story of the Salton Sea starts with a colossal mistake. Honestly, that's kind of perfect, because the whole history of this place is just one miscalculation after another. The Salton Sea was not supposed to exist at all. Back in the early 1900s, developers were trying to bring Colorado River water into California's Imperial Valley to turn the desert into farmland. It sounded great, and for a while it worked. In 1905, after some heavy rainfall and poor engineering decisions, the river broke through a series of irrigation canals and started pouring into the Salton Basin. For 2 years straight, water rushed in uncontrollably. Engineers tried to stop it, and they failed over and over again. Finally, in 1907, they managed to redirect the river back to its normal course. By then, the damage was done. An entire sea, 15 miles wide and 35 miles long, had been accidentally created in the middle of the California desert. At first, people thought this was amazing. By the 1950s, the Salton Sea had become one of the hottest tourist destinations in California. And I mean that literally and figuratively. This place was the Riviera of the desert. Celebrities showed up: Frank Sinatra, the Beach Boys, Sonny Bono. All of them visited or performed near the Salton Sea. Resorts popped up everywhere. Yacht clubs, marinas, and beach communities with names like Salton City and Bombay Beach were built along the shores. At its peak, the Salton Sea attracted more visitors per year than Yosemite. Yeah, you heard that right. More than Yosemite. This was the place to be if you wanted sun, water, and that weird mid-century optimism that anything was possible in the California desert. The fishing was incredible, too. In the 1950s, the California Department of Fish and Game stocked the sea with millions of fish, mostly corvina, sargo, and tilapia. These fish thrived in the warm, salty water, and for a while, the Salton Sea became one of the most productive fisheries in California. People were pulling in massive catches. Fishing tournaments drew crowds. Boat dealers set up shop. You could rent a cabin, catch dinner, and feel like you were living in paradise. There was even talk of building a massive resort complex that would rival anything in Palm Springs. This place had it all. But paradise doesn't last long in the desert, especially when that paradise is a geological accident that nobody really planned for. You see, the Salton Sea has no natural outlet. Water flows in from agricultural runoff, but it doesn't flow out. The only way water leaves is through evaporation. And when water evaporates in the desert sun, it leaves behind everything it was carrying: salt, fertilizers, pesticides, heavy metals. All of it stays in the sea and just keeps building up year after year after year. By the 1970s, the water was getting saltier, a lot saltier. Saltier than the Pacific Ocean, and fish started dying. Not just a few fish here and there, massive die-offs. Tens of thousands of fish washing up on shore, rotting in the heat, creating a smell so bad that people miles away could barely breathe. And it wasn't just the fish. Birds started dying too. The Salton Sea had become a critical stop on the Pacific Flyway, a major migration route for millions of birds traveling between North and South America. Pelicans, herons, egrets, grebes, over 400 species relied on the Salton Sea for food and rest. But as the water got more toxic, birds started getting sick. Avian botulism outbreaks killed thousands of birds at a time. Pictures of dead pelicans piled on the shore started making national news. Environmentalists rang the alarm. This wasn't just a bad year. This was an ecological disaster in the making. Then things got even worse. By the 1980s and the 1990s, the resorts were closing. The yacht club shut down. The marinas sat empty. Nobody wanted to vacation at a place that smelled like death and had toxic water. The small towns around the sea started to empty out. Bombay Beach, once a booming resort town, turned into a ghost town filled with abandoned trailers, rusted-out cars, and buildings half buried in sand. It looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. And honestly, that is kind of what it had become. Salton City, which was supposed to be a thriving lakeside community, never came close to its projected population. Streets were laid out, but most of the lots stayed empty. To this day, you can drive through and see rows and rows of street signs with no houses, just dirt and desert scrub. The water kept getting worse. Salinity levels kept climbing, surpassing even the Great Salt Lake in Utah. By the early 2000s, the Salton Sea was about 25% saltier than the ocean, and the fish? Almost all gone. Only the tilapia, one of the hardiest fish species on the planet, could still survive, and even they were struggling. Massive algae blooms turned the water green. Bacteria thrived. The sea began producing toxic gases, including hydrogen sulfide, which smells like rotten eggs and can be dangerous to breathe in high concentrations. Some days, the smell was so bad that it drifted all the way to Los Angeles, 150 miles away. And here's the thing that makes this even more tragic. The Salton Sea was not just a tourist attraction, it became a critical ecological habitat. Even as the water deteriorated, millions of migratory birds still depended on it. There are not a lot of wetlands left in Southern California, so the Salton Sea became one of the last refuges for these species. But with the fish dying off and the water turning toxic, the birds were starving and getting poisoned. Environmental groups started calling it a ticking time bomb. If the sea continued to dry up, it would expose thousands of acres of lake bed covered in agricultural chemicals and toxic dust. And that dust? It would blow straight into nearby communities, many of which are already some of the poorest and most polluted areas in California. Let us put some numbers to this nightmare. In the 1960s, the Salton Sea covered about 380 square miles. Today, it has shrunk significantly, and the waterline keeps receding. The salinity, which was around 3.5% in the 1960s, similar to ocean water, is now over 5%, and in some areas it is even higher. The fish population, which used to support a thriving recreational fishery, has collapsed. Bird die-offs, which were rare in the early days, now happen almost every year, with tens of thousands of birds found dead during major botulism outbreaks. And the smell? On bad days, you can detect it from miles away, a nauseating mix of decay, algae, and chemicals baking in the sun. So, what is even left at the Salton Sea today? Well, it is complicated. The sea itself is still there, but it is a shadow of what it once was. The water is too salty and too toxic for most life. The beaches are covered in the crushed bones of dead fish. From a distance, they can look like white sand. Up close, not so much. The old resorts are ruins. Some have been taken over by artists and photographers who see a strange beauty in the decay. Bombay Beach, has become something of a cult destination for people interested in apocalyptic tourism and outsider art. There's even an annual art festival where people build sculptures out of the wreckage. But for the people who still live in the communities around the Salton Sea, this isn't art. It's a public health crisis. As the sea dries up, it exposes a toxic lake bed full of pesticides, heavy metals, and other pollutants that blow into the air as dust. Studies have shown that the air quality in nearby towns is among the worst in the nation. Asthma rates are sky high. Children are especially vulnerable. And the state of California, they have known about this problem for decades, but progress has been painfully slow. There have been proposals, lots of them. Some want to pipe in water from the Pacific Ocean or the Sea of Cortez to refill the sea and stabilize the salinity. Others propose turning parts of the sea into a geothermal energy hub, since the area sits on top of significant geothermal resources. There have been plans to create wetland habitats around the edges to support birds, while letting the main body of the sea shrink in a controlled way. But all of these plans cost billions of dollars, and so far funding has been hard to come by. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking. Every year that passes, more lake bed gets exposed, more dust blows into communities, and more birds die. Is there any hope? Maybe. In recent years, California has started taking the Salton Sea crisis more seriously. There is funding for habitat restoration projects and dust suppression efforts. Some experimental projects are underway to create shallow wetlands that can support birds without requiring massive amounts of water. Geothermal companies are exploring ways to extract lithium from the brine, which could turn the Salton Sea into a resource instead of just a liability. Lithium is essential for electric car batteries, and the Salton Sea area could potentially supply a significant portion of the United States' lithium needs. If that happens, it could bring jobs and investment back to the region. But it is still early days, and there is no guarantee any of this will work. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, please go ahead and subscribe. I put out new videos all the time covering forgotten places, environmental disasters, and the strange stories that shaped America. If you have ever visited the Salton Sea or have thoughts on what should be done to save it, drop them in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Anyway, thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next one.